Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 6 hidden gems for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be talking about players at a variety of different positions, players that you would consider to be sleeper options, but I like to call them my hidden gems based on everyone's favorite cinematic universe. So over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be talking about players that either first and foremost aren't rostered in very many leagues or don't have a very high start percentage, players that are going to make an immediate impact based on the momentum they have gained over the course of the last couple weeks going into the upcoming matchup in Week 6. And because of all of the potential injuries and the snap that occurred, taking out 4 teams via bye week, many of our rosters are thin, so we need potential alternative options to supplement, get into our lineups, and help us capture a victory in Week 6. Before we begin, again, if you guys want to go ahead and find the timestamps, they're down there in the description. At the end of today's video, I'll be putting together a couple pick'em entries via Underdog. Again, if you guys haven't checked them out already, there's a link down in the description. At this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only will you be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, but you'll also be able to get my rankings every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These are rankings from weeks 6 through 18, and these include by position, by tier, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, defense, flex, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings. So on Sunday mornings, you know who to start, and of course, help yourself capture victories every single week. For those of you who are wondering, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility, and of course, potentially follow a couple of the pick'em entries that we put together at the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, let's get into talking about our hidden gems for Week 6, beginning with the Soul Stone. Like we talk about every single week, the Soul Stone requires a sacrifice of a player that we love. And unfortunately, Malik Neighbors for a second consecutive week is going to still be in the concussion protocol. Malik Neighbors, a wide receiver that has been balling out thus far this season from weeks 2 through 4. When healthy, was averaging 15 targets per game, 10 receptions, 107 receiving yards, a touchdown per game, and over 21.5 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. And in his absence, Darius Slayton absolutely stepped up within the quote-unquote Malik Neighbors role last week against the Seattle Seahawks and produced well enough to where we can trust him once again going into this week's matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals. To put it into perspective, Darius Slayton at this current moment in time is only rostered in 14% of Yahoo leagues and only being started in 8% of leagues. Last week against the Seattle Seahawks, 11 targets, 8 receptions, 122 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown, and 22.2 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Incredible numbers across the board that he's only going to continue to develop on going into this week's matchup because, quite frankly, it is an easier matchup taking on the Cincinnati Bengals defense. Now, when we talk about his performance last week, amongst all wide receivers in the National Football League in Week 5, he was number 1 in terms of first read target rate in terms of overall opportunity. Daniel Jones targeted him on 37% of his first reads. Amongst all players, he was ahead of Drake London and Jamar Chase, who were the only other 2 players that had a higher percentage than 28% in that overall category. As long as he continues to get funnel targeted and the offense that has been built by Brian Daboll, which has really helped improve Daniel Jones. I've talked about it a lot over the course of the last couple weeks. Daniel Jones has made huge strides forward. Now, whether that's the offensive line or whether that's Brian Daboll and the scheme that he has put forth, all of it has helped elevate Daniel Jones to this level to where we can trust Daniel Jones not only as a fantasy quarterback, but the weapons that are associated with him, like Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, and of course, Malik Neighbors when healthy. But besides the fact that he is going to get his opportunity, Darius Slayton has an opportunity of taking on the Cincinnati Bengals, who are quite literally the 10th best matchup at the position, allowing 29.22 fantasy points per game based on wide receiver receiving statistics allowed by this defense. Over the course of this season thus far, just giving you some of the performances of wide receivers against this secondary. Zay Flowers, 7 catches and 111 receiving yards. Rashad Bateman as well last week, 4 catches, 58 and a touchdown. Deontay Johnson, 7 catches for 83 and a touchdown. Xavier Legette, 6 catches, 66 and a touchdown. Terry McLaurin, 4 receptions, 100 and a touchdown. Rashee Rice, 5 for 75 and a touchdown. Those are just the most recent performances for wide receivers taking on the Cincinnati Bengals secondary. I'm anticipating a lot of success for Darius Slayton. And even though many of us want him to achieve the level of success that he was able to produce last week, scoring over 20 fantasy points, even if he's not capable of doing so, the targets, the receptions, and receiving yards will be able to get the job done in a top 36 capacity for many of our teams who are in desperate need of a potential wide receiver 3 option going into the upcoming, matchup for Week 6. The next player I wanted to mention is Ray Davis. Now, we talked about him a lot last night via our live stream. Again, I live stream here on the channel every single day. So for those of you interested, make sure you click the notification button so you can stay up to date when I'm live. Later tonight, I'll be live at around 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for those of you watching this right now. Okay, so when we talk about the reality of the situation, in regards to Ray Davis, as it currently stands, the Buffalo Bills take on the New York Jets on Monday Night Football. So there isn't a 100% designation as to whether or not Ray Davis will be the starting running back of this team, because there is still a possibility that James Cook could in fact be healthy and practice tomorrow and play on Monday night. Time will tell, but as it currently stands, James Cook has not participated in a single practice thus far this week. Thursday and Friday was given the DNP designation, which is did not participate. Therefore, with all the rumors that are swirling and all the information that has come out thus far, it being a toe/foot injury, the speculation is that James Cook is currently dealing with a turf toe injury. And if that is in fact the case, there is a very high likelihood that he is not going to be playing on Monday Night Football. If that would take place, of course, we're going to be in a situation in which Ray Davis would be the next man up. The reason why I designate Ray Davis as the next man up, despite the fact that he is the rookie running back in this backfield and has far less experience than someone like Ty Johnson, who is also implicated within this backfield, is based on the overall usage. Thus far this season, Ray Davis has only played 44 offensive snaps, has been given 26 rushing attempts on those 44 offensive snaps, in comparison to Ty Johnson, who has played 71 offensive snaps, significantly more than Ray Davis, but only has 10 rushing attempts in those overall opportunities. They prefer Ray Davis as the next man up within the rushing category, which is exactly what we need to fill in order to recoup the value of James Cook. Now, I'm not saying that Ray Davis is going to have the full reign of this backfield. Ty Johnson is still going to be implicated just in the same way in which, even though we still have James Cook implicated as a starter, there is still some rotations of Ty Johnson and Ray Davis over the course of a given week. So I do believe that there is going to be a little bit of a rotation within this backfield, but a lot of the potential opportunities that we want via rushing attempts could be going in the direction of Ray Davis. Now, many of you may be thinking, well, Andrew, isn't Ty Johnson more of the receiving back on this team? We saw him score a receiving touchdown against Jacksonville a couple weeks back. Even though that is a fact, the actual fact of the matter is that thus far this season, in terms of total targets of opportunity, Ray Davis has 5 total targets and Ty Johnson only has 6 total targets. So in terms of the overall opportunity share there, is relatively equal. I would assume that Ray Davis is going to be able to take over this backfield, a player that is currently only rostered in 10% of leagues and only being started in 1% of league, again, because we are still waiting on the overall official word as to whether or not James Cook is going to be playing this week, taking on the New York Jets, again, a defense that just got a potential boost because of the overall morale kind of jump that they're going to have with the firing of Robert Saleh. I don't know if they're going to have a morale boost, but they're definitely going to want to play tough for this new coach, the interim head coach, who prior to the elevation was the defensive coordinator. So I'm sure the defense is going to want to play well. But either way, the New York Jets thus far this season, they're allowing 10.6 fantasy points per game based on running back rushing statistics isolated. They're allowing 4.19 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. And most recently, to opposing running backs, they've allowed Mason for 147 and a touchdown. The Tennessee backfield, 82 rushing yards. Denver backfield, 123. Minnesota's backfield, with CJ Ham stealing a touchdown and Aaron Jones getting injured early, only able to accumulate 61 rushing yards in London, could have had far more numbers in that overall circumstance. I do believe this is a matchup in which, of course, the Buffalo Bills can take advantage of it, considering they are a run-first team thus far this season. All right, let's go ahead and let's move on to the thumbnail of today's episode. It is Bucky Irving. Now, the reason why this video is coming out as late as it is mainly because I wanted to get a confirmation as to whether or not Rachaad White was going to play. And now that we've been given a designation by Todd Bowles saying that Rachaad White is in fact a game time decision, and then later on, while I was doing my research, he was given the doubtful designation, like I've talked about over the course of the last couple seasons here. When a player is given the doubtful designation, they have less than 1% of a chance to potentially play. Therefore, we are anticipating for Bucky Irving to have the full slate of the overall backfield. A player that is currently only being started in 21% of leagues needs to have that number jump up a lot. He needs to get into that 80% range because I honestly think he is an automatic start going into the given week, considering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are taking on Spencer Rattler in his first start as an NFL quarterback. Now, with the potential matchup against a rookie quarterback, this could be a one-sided affair in the favor of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, from what we have seen from Bucky Irving thus far this season, he has been hyper efficient. And when they give him the entire workload of opportunity within this backfield, just to give you a perspective as to what kind of workload I'm talking about, thus far this season in the 5 games, the Buccaneers running backs are averaging 19.4 attempts, 88.2 rushing yards, 6 targets per game, 5.2 receptions, 37.4 receiving yards. If he is given, again, there's about 24 opportunities within the given game at the running back position. If he's given a vast majority of those with his overall efficiency numbers of 5.61 yards per carry, number 7 amongst all running backs with 20 or more potential rushing attempts, and a 3.68 yard after contact per attempt average, number 8 amongst all running backs with 20 or more potential rushing attempts, I think this is an advantageous matchup in which, once in fact the Tampa Bay Buccaneers amass their lead, they're going to be able to hand off the ball to Bucky Irving and completely kill the clock. The Saints are allowing 12.58 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs just off of rushing statistics isolated, rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. But most recently, we have seen the Kansas City Chiefs running backs 114 yards and a touchdown, Atlanta 88 rushing yards, Philadelphia 147 and 2 touchdowns. There is a lot of potential here for Bucky Irving with a vast majority of the opportunity of this backfield. Of course, Sean Tucker would be the next man up behind him. I don't expect Sean Tucker to get much utilization, mainly because because he is a special teams player, and Bucky Irving is the preferred of the two backs by a significant margin. In the second half, we should see a lot of running for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, trying to kill the clock and, of course, dominate their division rival, the New Orleans Saints. Okay, let's move on to the next player. Now, like I mentioned earlier this week when I ranked Calvin Ridley inside of my top 36 wide receiver rankings, I did mention again that Brian Callahan, the head coach of the Tennessee Titans, had specifically come out and said that he wants to get more utilization out of Calvin Ridley going forward. Obviously, Calvin Ridley thus far this season, in the last 2 games that he has played, has only seen 6 total targets, 2 receptions, 14 receiving yards, and 3.4 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. So I could understand your hesitation, and I understand that there's a reason why only 26% of Yahoo leagues currently have Calvin Ridley starting. But as this week's SLAYTON, I expect Calvin Ridley to shoot for the moon and fall amongst the stars, because the fact of the matter is he has an incredible opportunity, and his head coach / play caller, Brian Callahan, has specifically said the following. Earlier this week, he's been quoted to have said, "I got to do a better job in finding ways to get Calvin the ball. I need to use his speed and explosiveness more. Just get it in his hands every which way we can, and need to find a way to get him going." As long as the head coach and primary play caller knows that he needs to get Calvin Ridley the ball more often going forward, that's all I needed to hear. Because quite frankly, like I mentioned earlier this week, we've talked about, Cliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator of the Washington Commanders. He was asked in week 3, why isn't Terry McLaurin getting the ball? And then after that point, he was like, you know what? It's on me. I'm going to get him the ball. And then since then, Calvin Ridley's been a monster. You go back to week 2, Todd Bowles talked about, hey, you know what? We haven't seen a lot of opportunity out of Mike Evans. We're going to get him the ball more. He's going to be more featured. And what happened the week after against the Philadelphia Eagles? Dominated, and ever since has been great. So going forward, we're going to continue to see when a head coach, when a primary play caller comes out and specifically says, we're going to get this guy the ball, oftentimes they're going to be a man of their word. And in this upcoming matchup, taking on the Indianapolis Colts, the 8th best matchup at the position, I couldn't have imagined a better matchup for Calvin Ridley, considering he has his own experience against this defense in the past. You go back to last season, week 1, as a member of the Jacksonville Jaguars, taking on the Indianapolis Colts, went for 8 catches, 101 and a touchdown for 24 fantasy points. And those kind of numbers in terms of production are very similar to what other wide receivers have accomplished against the Indianapolis Colts thus far this season. So besides the fact that the Colts are allowing 32.72 fantasy points per game on average to opposing wide receivers, Jalen Jones, one of their primary cornerbacks, have allowed the 2nd most receiving yards amongst all cornerbacks in the National Football League thus far to opposing wide receivers. Not only that, on a per game basis, the Indianapolis Colts have allowed the 4th most receiving yards per game to opposing wide receivers and 3rd most receiving touchdowns to opposing wide receivers. Just some of the performances just to give you some perspective. Brian Thomas Jr., 5 catches, 122 and a touchdown. George Pickens, 7 catches for 113. Rome Odunze, 6 catches, 112 and a touchdown. And Nico Collins, 6 catches for 117. Those are 4 separate wide receivers in 5 games this season in which they've all been able to amass over 110 receiving yards against this secondary. My anticipation is that Brian Callahan, Will Levis, healthy now, are going to be looking in the direction of Calvin Ridley early and often within this game, and going up against the Indianapolis Colts, absolutely be able to take advantage of the opportunity of taking on one of the worst secondaries and defenses in the National Football League. We have seen Calvin Ridley earlier this season be relevant. It was against the New York Jets of all teams, in which he put up 22.7 half PPR fantasy points, 6 targets, 4 receptions, 77 receiving yards, and a touchdown, and even scored a rushing touchdown within the given game. He can be relevant. They just have to get him the ball in his direction. Again, we had heard Brian Callahan earlier this week say, specifically in the last matchup of which we saw the Tennessee Titans play against the Miami Dolphins, that matchup on its own, because Will Levis went down and because of how effective the running game was, and obviously the fact that the Miami Dolphins could not score, they just completely abandoned the passing game and continued to try to kill the clock. That was its own matchup in itself. Going forward, they're going to get more utilization out of Calvin Ridley. I think this is the breakout week as this week's SLAYTON. All right, let's move on to Keenan Allen. Now, time may not be in favor of Keenan Allen, of course, getting up there in age, but this upcoming week, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars in London, I think it's time for Keenan Allen to potentially be started, because at this current moment in time, he's only being started in 28% of leagues. And based on what we have seen most recently out of Caleb Williams playing incredibly well, and the fact that this offense is beginning to transform into a far more 11 personnel heavy set. Again, last week we saw Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, and DJ Moore all play 80+% of the offensive snaps. If we're going to exclusively sit in 11 personnel, this is only going to grant more opportunity for someone like Keenan Allen within the slot position to find himself success. Now, even though last week against the Carolina Panthers, only 6 targets, 3 receptions, and 33 receiving yards, this upcoming week, they take on the 3rd best matchup at the position, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are allowing 36.44 fantasy points per game. Amongst all teams in the National Football League thus far on a per-game average, allowing the 2nd most receptions and the most receiving yards per game to opposing wide receivers. Incredible overall statistics. And that's why I want to play Keenan Allen, because when we go ahead and specifically look at the matchup, they have allowed a lot of receiving statistics to opposing slot receiving options. I mean, amongst all teams in the National Football League, they've played the second most cover one. Again, they're playing a lot of man coverage, and it has granted opportunities for Josh Downs last week, 9 catches, 69. The week before, Stephon Diggs, 5 catches for 69. The week before that, Khalil Shakir, 6 catches for 72 and a touchdown. All these wide receivers finding success. So why not Keenan Allen, the next man up, taking on this matchup, which again, the secondary has not played well. They've dealt with injuries, and going into this upcoming matchup with Caleb Williams playing as well as he has over the course of the last 3 weeks, the expectation is immediate success within this overall upside matchup. Again, I could see every single receiving member of the Chicago Bears playing well. I could very easily see DJ Moore dominating as he should. Rome Odunze could also find himself a lot of success. Last week, Rome Odunze played 30% of his snaps within the slot position. And even last week, Rome Odunze's overall ADOT was 5.5 in comparison to the 2 weeks prior, which was 17.0 and 22.7. So I could see a lot more utilization going in the direction of Rome Odunze, exposure to opportunity in that kind of conversation. But I truly do believe that if Keenan Allen continues to stay within the slot position, he will find himself an abundance of success within the matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Moving on to the final receiving option here, and the final hidden gem of the week. It is this week's Mind Stone, Cursed with Knowledge. We believe that Jalen TOLBERT is an automatic play going into the week, currently only being rostered in 32% of Yahoo leagues and currently being started in 15% of those leagues. There's an opportunity here for Jalen TOLBERT to make an immediate impact in a matchup in which they should be throwing for majority of the game, primarily because first and foremost, the Detroit Lions run stop defense is elite. Even going back to the second half of the 2022 season, this defense has dominated opposing running backs on a consistent basis. So we should not expect much out of Rico Dowdle, Ezekiel Elliott within the running game. Therefore, it'll force Dak Prescott to have to continue to air it out. And in the absence of Brandon Cooks for another consecutive week here, Jalen TOLBERT has an opportunity to continue his streak of success. In 3 of the last 4 games that Jalen TOLBERT has played, he has scored over 11 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Now, obviously, a lot of those opportunities have come in blowouts against the New Orleans Saints and Baltimore Ravens, in which they were fighting back. But most recently, in this most recent week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, was given competitive usage in terms of playing his greatest overall snap count in his entire career, 89% of the snaps played, and was also able to get himself career highs in targets, receptions, receiving yards. My expectation is that Jalen TOLBERT will continue to be a heavy part of this overall passing attack, taking on the Detroit Lions secondary, which is the 4th best matchup at the wide receiver position, allowing over 36 fantasy points per game in that category, and on per game averages, the 4th most targets, receptions, and receiving yards to opposing wide receivers thus far this season. Jalen TOLBERT, who again is implicated to be a top 3 option within this offense, considering they don't get much utilization out of the running back position in terms of targets or dump offs. It's going to be CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, and Jalen TOLBERT lighting up the secondary in a matchup which will most likely be in a negative game script. And based on Vegas's overall total, this should be a high-scoring matchup between these two teams, very competitive, and I'm expecting another successful week with Jalen TOLBERT as this week's Mind Stone. All right, so now that we've gone ahead and we've covered our hidden gems for week 6, I want to go ahead and transition to talking about some pick'em entries via Underdog. Again, if you guys haven't yet already, be sure to sign up today. Not only will you be able to get my rankings every single Sunday morning for my email sent directly to yours, but you'll also be able to go ahead and take advantage of the new customer free pick of Joe Burrow, 0.5 total yards for this upcoming weekend, added through one of these potential picks, and of course, find yourself success. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's talk about a couple of my picks. Again, for the last, this is the 6th consecutive week, I'm putting in $1,000+ dollars worth of entries. So the first play that I wanted to share with you guys, putting my money where my mouth was in regards to Bucky Irving, is taking higher on 61.5 rushing yards. I think that is a very achievable number, especially considering Rachaad White, given the doubtful designation, is already potentially not going to play. And it is going to be a matchup against the New Orleans Saints. And like we talked about this entire episode with Bucky Irving, there should be a lot of upside with the opportunities that he is given. Again, they're running the ball with their running backs 19+ times per game. So again, 62 rushing yards, not an incredibly high number. Then we move on to DARIUS SLAYTON, continuing to put my money where my mouth is. DARIUS SLAYTON, 6 targets should very easily be achieved. 7 total targets. When we talk about the quote-unquote Malik Neighbors role, the fact that, of course, Malik Neighbors from weeks 2 through 4 was averaging 15 targets per game. SLAYTON is coming off of a game of 11+ targets. Again, we talked about it. DARIUS SLAYTON, an automatic play in this circumstance. And then we move on to Trey McBride. Again, the expectation is that Jair Alexander is going to return, which is going to make it far more difficult for players on the boundary like Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison Jr. to find an abundance of success. And we have seen that the Green Bay Packers are a top-tier matchup at the tight end position. We talked about it yesterday in our tight end rankings episode. So I do believe that Trey McBride could very easily surpass this number, as he'll probably be the most targeted and have the most receptions amongst all Arizona Cardinals receiving options within the upcoming contest. So this is my first entry of the week. But let's move on to the next entry that I really like. Now, I may have gotten a little bit too cute with this. So again, be responsible on your end, but this is the way that I've gone about it. I'm putting Calvin Ridley into this overall play. Like I mentioned earlier, we have seen 4 different wide receivers amass over 110 receiving yards against that secondary, and Brian Callahan's words mean that there are going to be a lot of opportunities for Calvin Ridley to find himself success. So 44.5 receiving yards, not out of the realm of possibility. And in fact, that should be the base minimum. Then we move on to Chris Godwin. We've talked about this earlier this week. Mike Evans is taking on his kryptonite matchup against Marshawn Lattimore. So if this is going to be a game in which Chris Godwin succeeds, understand that again, thus far this season, Chris Godwin has surpassed this number of 62.5 receiving yards 4 of the last 5 games. He's put up 64, 69, 117, 83. And the only game in which he wasn't able to surpass this was 53 receiving yards. And again, when we talk about the last 4 matchups that he has taken on the New Orleans Saints, 81, 114, 63, and 140. So I'm anticipating him to be able to surpass this number with relative ease in the overall week. Then we move on to Derrick Henry. Has scored himself a touchdown in 5 out of the last 5 games. The expectation is another week of immediate success. But I even went back and I tracked back to last season. When we talk about the last 12 games that Derrick Henry has started in, he has scored 13 touchdowns in those last 12 games. He's also vulture protected, so if in fact Lamar Jackson steals a rushing touchdown within the given game, you are at a base minimum saved going into the week. And then the final player is Bijan Robinson, going higher than 66.5 rushing yards. Again, we've talked about it. The Carolina Panthers are by far and away the easiest matchup at the position, and I don't care that Tyler Algier is digging into his overall workload. This is a breakout game for Bijan Robinson. I've talked about it all week. If you can trade for him, get it done. This is the week in which he makes a bounce back. He finds himself an abundance of success, and of course, is able to close out my overall entry, 500 turning to 38. Again, pretty good overall numbers across the board. I'm pretty confident with this one, but of course, do so responsibly. The final player that I wanted to suggest, this is one that I just threw together just right before I began recording, mainly because Shohei Ohtani has this higher than 0.5 plate appearances. All he has to do is get on first base once, and we're good to go. Outside of that, Zay Flowers, in any competitive matchup that he has had thus far this season, double-digit targets. Amari Cooper has been able to surpass 7.5 targets every single game this season. When you take on a top 5 matchup like the Eagles, again, you would anticipate 8 or more targets. Then we have CeeDee Lamb, who, again, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Expect him to continue to complain, and of course, eventually get himself potentially in the realm of 8+ receptions within the upcoming week. Last time he took on the Detroit Lions, had 13 receptions on 17 targets. And then, of course, Jordan Love, 9 consecutive games of 2 or more touchdowns within a given week. He takes on the Arizona Cardinals, which is a solid matchup, allowing 73% passing completion percentage to opposing quarterbacks. Okay, that's going to cover it in regards to my underdog entries going into week 6. We'll have more included within the upcoming live streams, so be sure to swing on by if you guys want any of those. Make sure to ask in the live chat, and I'll be able to share. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you guys have not yet already, subscribe, click the like button down below. And until next time, which will be tomorrow, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Sunday morning, starting at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 4-hour live stream prior to the kickoff of Sunday morning. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.